The wreck still feels impossibly large because only one damaged side is visible at a time. This liner's scale survives even in ruin because the structural rhythm keeps repeating into darkness. The upper works look less like a ruined vessel than a wounded steel cliff. Even a broken letter confirms how much of the ship's public face was torn free. The first entry point is not a door now, but a wound widened by time. Once inside, the wreck stops behaving like a hull and begins behaving like architecture. The damaged volume matters here. It tells us this was a public threshold, not a cramped service passage. Instrument fragments this far from the bridge usually tell a story of violent displacement. This stair volume restores scale immediately. One beam cannot hold all of it. The repeated thresholds are useful. They hold the route together even when the floors do not. Luxury survives here as workmanship first, not as polish. The room widens suddenly, proving the stairwell was only the beginning of the ship's interior scale. Public rooms become maps of impact, because the furnishings record the force of the list. Even stripped of finish, the room keeps announcing its original height. A dining fragment makes the disaster intimate, without needing spectacle. The route tightens here, but the furniture pattern confirms a deliberate room sequence. Rooms like this mattered socially. They carried the routines of travel, not just transport. The writing furniture reads like evidence of ordinary minutes interrupted abruptly.
Preservation often means knowing when the beam is enough and the hand is too much.
A recurring junction becomes memory in a wreck, long before it becomes certainty. Minor silt-outs do not look dramatic. They simply steal your distance first. Small personal remnants often travel farther than heavier parts of the room. Orientation returns here through architecture, not through haste. Cabins compress the human scale, but the wreck still reveals another layer beyond them. The list converted every small room into a gravity map of the sinking. Numbered fittings are among the quietest ways a wreck keeps its original order. Service spaces deepen the route without breaking its logic. Every major tear reminds us the interior never ends cleanly. It breaks back into the river. The object field changes before the room does. Function announces itself early. Route labels become archaeological anchors once the original route is gone. This room keeps its identity instantly because the sorting walls are unmistakable. Rooms devoted to systems are often the best preserved in memory because their pattern is so strict. Scale in here comes from repetition, stacked well above the diver's reach. Administrative order survives here as hardware, long after paper has failed. Functional rooms often survive in clusters, and the cluster tells us more than any single object. This office feels compressed by damage, but its layers still reveal the ship's administrative spine. The office retains trace evidence best where enclosed spaces trap small things quickly. The stairwell returns as the strongest spatial anchor in this section of the wreck.
A remembered void can be more reliable than a marker when the ship still keeps its major geometry.
Service stairs reduce the grandeur, but they increase the wreck's sense of depth. Food service debris often settles where the ship's list made every landing a catchment basin. The wreck does not need collapse to warn you. A small shower of dust is enough. The safest correction is often small. Step back, read the structure, then continue. Kitchen traces often survive as humble metal because daily use wore them into resilience. The ship keeps enlarging itself by revealing another layer behind each practical surface. The next descent leads away from passenger life and toward the ship's harder mechanical core. The route now crosses from domestic service spaces into the ship's working interior. Vertical service shafts often preserve continuity because they link entire functional stacks of the ship. The machinery side announces itself first through repeated pipes, not through the engines themselves. Service labels and hardware are often more durable than the spaces they once organized. The ship's cold storage volume is larger than expected, more workshop than pantry. Cold storage hardware preserves movement patterns even after the cargo is long gone. A room like this still reads as a system because every line once served controlled storage and motion. The path remains readable because each workroom leaves a distinct silhouette behind it. A shaft like this is invaluable underground and underwater alike because it fixes both level and direction. The corridor compresses the body, so the next larger volume will be unmistakable. Here the ship's domestic functions give way to heat, pressure, and mass. Boiler rooms preserve scale through repetition. One front means little until the next 7 appear. The machinery becomes overwhelming when the camera moves along it instead of stopping at a single unit. A loose tag can preserve the logic of a whole machine long after the machine has failed. The path now trades volume for access, which is where wreck navigation becomes physical. This is the kind of narrowing that matters. Not dramatic, just slightly smaller than memory wants it to be. The hazard here is geometry, not panic. Near sticks are often solved by subtraction. Less motion, less force, less ego. Once the body is no longer negotiating the doorway, the wreck's true scale returns all at once. Workspaces like this reveal labor through arrangement, even when the tools themselves are scattered. Numbering survives where memory does not, and that makes even small plates useful. No single beam can hold the whole engine room, which is precisely why its scale survives. The catwalk provides passage, but it also reveals how deep the machinery volume actually is. Parallax is enough here. The room explains itself once the layers start moving against one another. A small dial becomes meaningful here, only because the surrounding machinery is so overwhelming.
The engine room keeps offering lower levels without ever closing its upper volume.
Lower decks complicate the route, but the vertical engine void keeps the orientation honest. At this level, the ship no longer feels furnished. It feels articulated. Small precision parts matter most when they sit against structures built on a colossal scale. The route narrows again, but the engine room remains visible enough to anchor direction. Auxiliary spaces are often the hardest to read, because complexity replaces openness. A space can feel large, not because it is empty, but because the complexity keeps unfolding. Maintenance hardware is often where the individual hand of engine room work survives. Even here, deep in machinery, the river keeps entering through structural wounds. In dense compartments, the best landmark is usually the largest volume you can still see. Electrical rooms often keep their identity through materials alone: ceramic, copper, and rigid geometry. This compartment narrows the scale again, but its layered fittings keep it from feeling small. Control systems often survive as fragments of language: labels, numbers, and component names. Passages like this are easy to underestimate because their complexity hides the room sequence. Disorientation begins in moments like this, when depth is reduced but geometry still remains.
The correct response is measured retreat, not abandoning the room. Small workshops carry the touch of routine repair more clearly than grand machinery halls do.
Inventory tags often outlive the tools they once organized. Trace evidence is strongest when left exactly where the wreck finished arranging it. The path remains legible because each room yields back to a larger one. At this depth in the wreck, the engine room begins to feel less explored than merely glimpsed. Below this point, the wreck stops offering broad explanation and begins demanding harder choices. This lower route begins where the machinery spaces stop feeling surveyed and start feeling inferred. The lower troughs matter because they preserve the ship's functional direction even after collapse. Spaces like this enlarge the wreck again by replacing corridors with systems. The room proves its scale vertically first, then by repetition. Fragments like this preserve the language of monitoring long after the readings are gone. The best routes are the ones that preserve a larger landmark, even while they narrow. The wreck's continuity depends on retaining the memory of room size while entering smaller spaces. Here the machinery scale compresses into the scale of hands, tools, and maintenance. This is the dangerous kind of whiteout, local, sudden, and just enough to erase distance. The recovery is simple: stop, back to the last clear threshold, and let the structure return. Recovered orientation is most useful when it leads to careful seeing, not renewed haste. Trace evidence gains meaning from position, caught, pinned, and undisturbed. A second trace in the same line changes the room from workshop to witness. The room no longer offers an artifact, it offers a person's final place within the ship's failure. The correct action after recognition is restraint. A wider room is not an escape from meaning, only a way to carry it without disturbing it. The wreck widens again, but the previous discovery remains part of the route's weight. The engine room keeps reasserting scale whenever the camera yields to its verticals.
Changing elevation here is not a scene change. It is a way to read the same machine from another layer.
This ledge shows how many levels the machinery still occupies, despite collapse. Keeping one edge on the large volume is what prevents a platform from becoming another anonymous corridor. A maker's plate turns anonymous machinery into something with authorship and datable intent. Shaft routes often feel more uncertain because the room yields to long mechanical tunnels. The shaft tunnel is the opposite of the engine room, not vertical revelation, but prolonged compression. Long repetition is its own hazard because it can flatten direction into sameness. Tunnel navigation often depends on small remembered intervals rather than grand landmarks. Small service points are often the only human-scale punctuation inside large mechanical tunnels. When a tunnel starts speaking through its metal, the correct response is to listen. Retreat begins before panic, while the route is still simple enough to trust. Leaving at the first credible warning is not caution wasted, it is field discipline.
A controlled retreat preserves orientation better than a rushed forward turn.
Once the larger room is back in view, the decision to leave becomes irreversible. Withdrawal works best when it follows the same architecture that made entry legible. At the moment of retreat, familiar levels become more valuable than unexplored ones. Respect means carrying the memory of what was found, without revisiting it for emphasis.
Leaving now is not only safer, it is also the correct point to preserve the site's balance.
Reverse travel is easiest when every bend has already been learned once in patience. Upward motion matters now, because every meter gained simplifies the wreck.
The room that once invited deeper descent now functions only as a return map.
Recognition of the next choke point is exactly what makes retreat disciplined, rather than reactive. A known squeeze is safer than an unknown one, but only if it is treated with the same respect twice. The second pass proves the point. Geometry rewards patience both ways. What felt immense on entry now serves as a measured ladder back towards safer complexity. Large vertical anchors are most valuable on the way out, when detail begins to blur into fatigue. Objects once examined become only landmarks when the logic of departure takes over. The return to public architecture is also a return to cleaner orientation. The ship gives the route back in the same order it offered the route inward. What has been confirmed is the wreck's internal coherence, its violence of displacement, and the scale that still survives both. What remains unknown is still extensive, and leaving now protects both the team and the site from unnecessary disturbance. We leave because the wreck has answered enough for one descent, and because some places must remain undisturbed to keep their truth.